Sorry for the buzzwordy title. Let's see what we can make out of this. Who is, by the way, let's start off with a little quiz. Who is saying yes? Okay. Who is saying no? Is anybody saying finally? Okay. Well, so we seem to have different expectations of what this might bring or might not bring. So especially the newer folks, I count myself towards the older folks, I'm afraid, at this point. We remember back in the days when we were writing code ourselves. And nowadays, the new generation is probably coming in and saying, like, well, there was a time when you wrote code without ChatGPT yourself. Those must be interesting or horrible times. So how does that look like? And the question then often is, like, who is writing code on their own? Who is using ChatGPT? And then who is actually testing the code that they copy from ChatGPT? Because I saw the stats from Source Labs, and they said like 61% of us, and I didn't ask you to raise your hand because we're never sure who wants to admit, say they take code from ChatGPT and a quarter doesn't test it on a frequent basis even. And that just shows us how much trust we often seem to have in technology and if that is well-founded or not. But this is what we seem to be doing, and everybody can think for themselves. Also, when you generate code with ChatGPT, do you generate tests for that as well? Or do you write the tests manually, or you're not writing tests anyway? So maybe those are all things that we need to consider at some point. Generally, what is good about ChatGPT, and I'm just using ChatGPT as one well-working large language model, but this will apply to pretty much any large language model or LLM, how they're being called. Things that are good or bad about ChatGPT when using them for our job. What might be a problem or what might be good about them? Yeah?
I personally like to generate texts if I have to write a blog post or something.
Yes, I also highly abuse it for that. For example, somebody asked for a LinkedIn recommendation, and I hate writing LinkedIn recommendations, but ChatGPT is great for those. And I think at this point, 80% of the LinkedIn recommendations are auto-generated. But yeah, you can do that. One thing I don't like so much is the cutoff time, that the data is not really current. So for example, since I work for Elastic and we have Elasticsearch, if I would ask ChatGPT, what is the current version of Elasticsearch? It would give a very outdated answer because its knowledge is just back from then. And a lot of information is stable enough that this doesn't matter, but sometimes it does matter and it does create problems. So the question is, will it take over my job, yes or no? And I feel like most of you already said no, and that's probably the case, but it can still change a lot of things or help us with our job. Though what I've done is, obviously I asked ChatGPT if it will take over my job. And it's always very polite, and it says like, well, it will only enhance the human capabilities rather than take over our jobs. And then, yeah, it's not a replacement of human workers, so it's very generous about that. And then I asked ChatGPT, because sometimes it lies to you, or that hallucination or fabrication is often a problem, and then you need to poke it again and say like, are you really sure? And then sometimes it changes its mind. So sometimes when it lies to you and you say like, but this is wrong, then it says like, oh yeah, sorry, actually this is not true, something else is right. So what I did then is, I asked it, can I trust you on this one? And then it's already like kind of like backing off, and it's like, trust only to the best of my knowledge, which is only based on old information. So it's less sure about it now if it will try to take my job at some point or not. The interesting thing is, there was a very recent New York Times article that said for ChatGPT, even when it just summarizes facts, it lies 3% of the time or is incorrect. If you use some Google system, you have a 27% chance, which might not be a feature in this case, but you need to be vigilant of how much you trust your LLMs and how good the results actually are. So since I work for Elastic, I wanted to show you something a bit more hands-on, what we can actually do with that, or where this might come in handy. So let's say we have a lot of services, and I think one of my services, is this large enough for everybody to see? well, let's keep it like this. And I can see there is the Go checkout service that seems to have a problem. And I have no idea about Go, by the way. So I might just look at what are the error messages here. And what I can then do is I could, for example, open this error message, and it says where it's coming from, and you have a stack trace at the bottom. But we also integrated ChatGPT. So this is using Azure OpenAI, the OpenAI integration. So it is ChatGPT behind the scenes. It can just ask, what is this error message? It basically takes all of the information from this page, just throws it at ChatGPT with the question, what's this error message? And then it will start answering. So you don't need to go to Google anymore. You don't need to copy around the stack trace or any other information. It will just start answering what it can make out of this. And then it says like, well, and it's generally very chatty. So it doesn't want to shut up at some point. If you're not happy with the answer, you can, by the way, always regenerate it as well, what you can always do in ChatGPT. But here, and this is actually funny because this was different before, which is the joy of ChatGPT, that it's not always 100% stable, because I could swear when I generated this 2 hours ago, the answer looked different. This is, by the way, another interesting thing about ChatGPT is that it's not 100% stable. So even as in any live demo, stuff can go wrong. With this stuff is not certain to go wrong, but there is a good chance that stuff will change or go wrong. Though it might still be helpful where it says like, the service might be overloaded or more to look into. It might try to access a remote resource like a database. So it does give you a good boilerplate of how to approach this. So even if you have somebody who just started on the job and doesn't know how your services work, or how to debug a Go program, or what the dependencies are, it can make some sense out of this already and at least get you started. But I have a second slightly more elaborate example, and hopefully ChatGPT is stable on this one. So we have an alert here, and this is a bit of historic data, and we'll need to remember June 7th, 2022. So we have too many log entries here for this period in time. And this is just for this specific service. Now, the classic way of how you would often debug that would be, you go to your logs, and then I see, okay, I see here is a spike. Okay, that's what I was expecting. And now I have 7 million log events. Do I want to manually go into those and look at them? And then I could, for example, here look at the underlying JSON document, and it has a lot of metadata that all comes in handy and makes debugging easier. It has full traces, and like we have enriched it with whatever other information. So this is a JavaScript client-side RUM agent that was running, and it was extracting all of that information, and I could go to the next event, which is probably something else. So this is coming from Redis. And now you could go through all of those log lines, which is probably rather tedious. So why not use our ML or AI powers to make this a bit easier? So when I go back here, I could just say like, show me the details of this alert. And then in this alert, it says like, here there's this log spike. And you can also see here before, like the log volume was pretty low, and now it's spiked. The other thing that it can automatically do here for me is, it knows that previously this was fine, and it says this was the baseline, and now we have this log spike here, and this is a deviation. And then this is not even ChatGPT, this is just like a feature that is built in Mana where it says like, this period here, what changed from back here? And then it says like, for example, one thing that changed is that the username is pgbench for most of these requests. So somebody was running pgbench against my system, and it just points out these things. Now, this is just anomaly detection or like comparing like 2 different time periods and what changed over those. But we can again say like, well, I want to figure out what is actually going on here. So we have this addition here where it says the possible causes and remediations. And again, it will be a bit chatty. And it will give me the general answer, well, it's running Postgres on Kubernetes, and then it says something about pgbench, and it gives me a very long answer about like begin and end query and whatever. So all of this is helpful, and it even says like investigate the pgbench user activity. and it keeps talking for a while. But it does provide a lot of pointers. Though at some point, maybe you're newer to the field, you don't know what PG Bench is. You might just want to ask more questions. So what I can do here is I just jump into this one, and building off of the information that I have from before is I could ask, what is PG Bench? Because I've never seen that. Let's see what it does. So it will explain that to me. I don't need to go anywhere else. I can just follow along here. And it says, well, it will improve performance after doing benchmarks, and it's doing all of this. And then I could ask it something like, should I run this in production? And let's see. It says, generally not recommended, so it's never super sure, but it says generally it's not recommended. Okay, so so there might be reasons why to do this, but in our case, maybe you shouldn't have done this. And this is nice and fun. Though this thing can actually do a lot more. So we have basically given it some functions, and it ties into, it can query the Elasticsearch API. It can also query the Kibana API. It can generate alerts. It can fetch which services we have, correlations, all kinds of things. And we can just start asking it questions, and it will call further things to figure out stuff for us. So I said before this was on, I think, June 7th. And I could ask it, did this, wait, let me cheat. What was my question? Yes. Did this impact, did this have an impact on my revenue on June 7, 2022? Because that was the date when this was running. And now ChatGPT will figure out that I'm talking about revenue. And then it will just look at things in the system that could be related to revenue. And for example, here what it does is it calls the lists of the services that I have running. And hopefully this works now. Because it should then automatically figure out from the name of the services what might be revenue related and might query those. And you can see here what it does is it figures out that revenue might be related to checkout, and it might also be, so it figures out that this is related to the checkout service. It graphs it out automatically, so it knows how to build a visualization based on the data that I have. And you can see here something happened. And then it even explains to me the checkout service on June 7th at 11 a.m. was, it looks like this had a direct relationship to revenue, and it sees an impact here. So it can graph that out for you. It will figure all of this out. You don't have to do anything else. You could even say, nochmal auf Deutsch, bitte. So if you don't like the English text, you could just say like, try again. And this is just the power of ChatGPT, that it can do all of these things for you out of the box. So we didn't have to build anything around that. It's just using the information that we have before. And you can see, so it is not sure, it's kind of cautious, but it's kind of, it has the pointers and says like, well, I see the impact on the checkout service. And yes, I think this was relevant. And you can see here, we called this APM time series to get the graph. Though it does sometimes get confused. So sometimes it tries to query logs out of Kibana rather than Elasticsearch. So you sometimes need to rephrase things to put it on the right path. But as long as it's on a good track, this will often do very well. And then we can ask it, can you visualize the revenue from June 7, 2022? I've shown you before how to do that. So what we have done here as well is you can throw other information into it and add that to the context of ChatGPT, and it will use that for the answers. So you could, for example, add previous GitHub or Jira issues, and then it could even say like, oh, I've seen this error before, or there is an open issue for this already. Because, for example, it has the same stack trace as a GitHub issue that you have somewhere else, and it would correlate those automatically and could answer that. Or in this example, I have shown it where to find my revenue, and it can then build a visualization, hopefully, that shows me how this correlated with the revenue. So it recalls some information that I've shown to it before. And in a moment or two, hopefully, it will actually show me how this has impacted the revenue. Come on. And yeah, you can see here, this is the chart of the revenue. And again, you can see at the same time, when our service was degraded, our revenue also dipped down here. It just builds a regular visualization, so you could just go to the visualization and work with that or refine that. I didn't need to figure anything out about that. So I have an index with the revenue information, and it kind of like made sense out of that. Though, of course, things need to be named correctly, and then you need hopefully to be lucky that this works. And now I have lost my context, but you can actually go to all the conversations that you've had. I think this was me. Yeah?
One question about that, the conversation. Question, the conversation. I'm the whole day here.
I can also just repeat for you.
Test 1, 2. Yeah, of that. Yeah. The conversation are stored user-based. That means when a specific user does some conversations, this only are remembered for him, or the whole company, or are they shared somewhere, or how it works? Because if I have a really stupid employee who's asking stupid questions and ruining my prompts, I don't want this to happen.
Well, I mean, so yeah. First, are there stupid questions? Second, I'm not sure how that is implemented right now. So I think it just combines all the chats. But I mean, you don't have to go to these if you don't want to. I'm just going to the previous conversation, so you can also look up what somebody else was doing. It can, by the way, also be quite helpful that you take this entire conversation and say, create an incident out of this, so that you want to explicitly share that, because here there's a lot of context and maybe somebody else wants to work on top of that. And they don't want to start over with all the conversations and question and querying. So you can do all of that. This, I think, is just the collection of things that we have done or tried in the past. So I don't know. I have another example where we look at hashing functions, and then we see that SHA-3 is maybe not a very fast hashing function, and then we can query it. And you can even ask ChatGPT, like, give me suggestions for faster hashing functions, like what should I use instead? And it will make suggestions right on the spot, so you can make all of those adjustments. But I'm not 100% sure if that is per user or not. I would need to log out and see if I can actually do that. I wasn't expecting stupid users to, or let's say the assumption was this would be useful context for everybody, so it might actually be helpful for everybody to see. So here you have I have my entire conversation, and then you could just pick that up either from yourself or a colleague, or you could create an incident out of that, or you say like, create an alert for me based on something new that I've learned. So it can just walk you through all of those and do that for you. And everybody who has been on the internet for too long and listened to Gartner has heard the term AI ops that everybody has been talking about. And I feel like now we finally reached that thing, AI ops, that looks totally different than what we were promised or were talking about 3 or 4 years ago. But we have finally reached that AI ops. And by the way, my opinion is that AI in this context stands for actionable insights. It is not necessarily only intelligent, but you really want those actionable insights. So it should tell you something changed, or find the bad stuff. it should be able to tell you what changed and how to probably then fix it afterwards. And that, I think, in terms of AI ops, ChatGPT and LLMs are doing a much better job than all the things that were built before and people tried to sell it, AI ops, but now we suddenly have AI ops more or less at our fingertips. There's one more thing to add here. We actually, since we have a product for security and one for observability, and they started implementing this at the same time, they took opposing approaches. The security team took a very conservative approach. It basically prompted very manually, and it can only do a few things, but it will do those things very well and correctly. The observability implementation that I've just shown you is much more exploratory. It basically says, like, these are all the functions you can call. Try to figure out what makes sense here, call other things, generate stuff. And it can totally go off the rails and give you wrong information, and it can go off the tracks, but it has a lot more options. It just is not super stable because, well, ChatGPT keeps changing, and sometimes it's just confused by the way you phrase something or by the information that it finds. So which one is better or worse is a bit up for discussion. I think the security one is kind of boring at this point, whereas the observability one, if you know what to ask, it will give you amazing results and just show you cool stuff, but it can also go totally wrong. So that is a trade-off here that you will need to be able to accept. There was also a recent paper that actually analyzed how good are Stack Overflow questions done by ChatGPT, just in terms of like how much should you trust ChatGPT answering your production issues. And they found that 52% of the answers were inaccurate and 77% were verbose. Though nevertheless, in 40% of the cases, people preferred ChatGPT because it is so verbose. So it's kind of like this fallacy that ChatGPT always sounds very, or it knows what it's doing and it talks a lot about what it's doing. That's why people tend to trust it too much. And I think that's a bit the fallacy of ChatGPT, that it always pretends to really know, and it gives you a very long article about something, and then you might trust this more than a human who is very brief and just gives you a correct answer. So that is a fallacy you need to be cautious of. Though that paper also only had a very small sample set, that's why it should be taken with caution. So to wrap up, I think our new ChatGPT overlords are here. Who is asking on Stack Overflow anymore, right? Everybody just plugs stuff into ChatGPT and takes whatever it gets as an answer. So we have reached this new state, and I think we have finally reached something like AI ops, where we can just be driven by that. But it's still the human driving it, and it's just the support and assistance. So again, I don't think it's taking our jobs, though it will change our jobs quite a bit, and it will make our lives easier, especially if you are new to a system or if you're new to technology. It can give you a lot of helpful pointers. Just don't trust it too much. And with that, are there any questions for the last 5 minutes? Yes, please. I can repeat. Or we can throw the thing if you want to. OK, I'll repeat. Yeah, so the question is basically, how does it know all of the custom things in my application? Yeah, so we prompt it the right way. So basically, when you open the prompt, and especially once you're like when you're in a place like let's take the error message, because that's maybe relatively simple. It will have the context of, like, it will have the stack trace, it will know the service, it will have some metadata, like it will know, is this running on Kubernetes, in what namespace? So it will provide all of the context in the question. And then, once it has the context, and it will always say, like, you're a helpful assistant and you try to resolve a user's problem, here is all the meta information around it, and only then will it ask, what is this error message? And then it is using all the context that you provide to answer the question. So yeah, the thing that you need to build around that is adding the relevant context so it can answer in a meaningful way. What is relevant, again, might depend, and it's very much the user expectation of how this should work and how much automation you want in it. The cool thing in our questions here is And this is why this one can go off the rails so much, is because it can call all of these functions as well. So if ChatGPT sees a question, it might, or we basically prompt it to say, like, these are all the things you can do. And if you think this will help the case, do them. So for example, it can get a service summary or a service list. And then it can, that was how it figured out like how the revenue was impacted because we had the checkout service. But it needs to give that flexibility to actually actively explore to make the most out of that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So if we go up here again, so I asked it, did it have an impact on my revenue? And then it was calling the services list. And it executed in my user account that service list. And then it got the time series for those services. And then it said like, well, this one that says checkout looks related. And this is actually the graph for this one. So it can do that. But just as a word of caution, this is a demo, so we know that this one works reasonably well. It can also fail completely. So I don't want to sell this as like, oh, this will totally work all the time, because that's probably not the case. Any other questions? Yes, please.
I'm just wondering, when you're given it that information in the system, everything that it needs to answer the question, is it first supplied to ChatGPT as like a free prompt, so you give it all of this information in the first instance that you chat with it, or is it a fine-tuned model in the background?
No, so the question was, is it a fine-tuned model or do we provide the context? No, we provide the context. It's not a fine-tuned model. It's just using the OpenAI service running on Azure. You could plug in different services. So you basically need to configure what is the LLM that you want to use. I think it could also use AWS Bedrock and others. It's not fine-tuned. We just prompt it with the right context what to answer. Yeah, yes, please.
So when you provide all the data he needs to answer the question, how about security? How about you giving away all your relevant data you have in your Elastic?
So the question is, do you really want to give that information to somebody else? I think OpenAI promises if you use the API that it will not learn from that or use that for anything. If you trust that, I don't know. The question is also, does it matter for your average application?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you need to figure that out for yourself, what makes sense and what is acceptable in terms of risk. If it's like a random application, I mean, it's not like you're handing over all your source code. It's just like a stack trace. What are you going to learn from the stack trace? But yeah, that's a question you need to answer. With great power comes great responsibility. So I don't know what to make out of that. Yeah. I think we're pretty much out of time. But come to me afterwards. I'm happy to answer. I think you had a question as well. Just come to me afterwards. Thanks a lot for joining. Don't be afraid of your jobs, but use the powers that you got. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Philipp.